Welcome back, everyone. We're diving back into the wisdom of Saadi. This is episode 41. We've got, 9 more to go after this, 41 of 50 in our journey through Saadi's work. Just a quick heads up before we really get going. What you're going to hear, it's a translation, conversations between Iranian philosophers. So we do our best to make sure everything is accurate. But sometimes, things get lost in translation. So just bear with us if anything sounds a bit off. Today, we're going to be looking at this story. And it's about an old holy man who's having some real trouble with his knee. It's causing him a lot of pain. Honestly, it's one of those stories that seems really simple on the surface, but it's got some hidden depths to it, some real surprises.
Yeah, I love those kinds of stories. They're like riddles, but for the soul.
Exactly. Okay, so picture this. We got this old man, really devout, really struggling with his knee pain. And then his friend, thinking they're alone, suggests he stretches his leg out, just to get a little bit of relief. Sounds like, just basic human kindness, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Totally a natural thing to do.
But here's the thing. Here's where it gets interesting. The holy man, he refuses.
Yeah.
And he says he's not alone because God is with him.
Mm.
And I got to admit, my first thought was, is this about, being super strict in his religious practice? Is this what it means to be devout?
Yeah.
It felt a little intense. What was your first reaction?
Yeah, no, it's easy to jump to that conclusion. I think, though, that Saadi is, he's doing something a bit more subtle here. It's not just about following the rules blindly. I think it's about a change, a real shift in how you see the world. The holy man, he's not just saying, hey, God exists. He's living in that presence. It's real to him. And this story, it shows us the difference between, knowing something in your head and actually, having that knowledge change you.
Yeah, it's the difference between knowing about gravity and actually taking a tumble, right?
Exactly. One's just an idea, and the other is really living it. And this, it goes back to a central idea in Sufism. Nothing is separate from God's presence. No place, no time, no action. It's all connected. So this holy man, he's not being rigid. He's showing us a totally different way to be in the world.
So it's not about the rules, but about seeing the world through a completely different lens. But how do we actually do that? It's one thing to get the concept.
You're right, and Saadi knows that. Understanding that God is everywhere, that's easy. But really living it, that's the challenge, I think. It takes more than just your mind. You got to bring your emotions into it, even your body. It's got to be more than just a head trip.
Right. I'm starting to see how this story about knee pain is way deeper than it seemed at first. It's making me think about my own life. Do I live as if God is present all the time? Or do I kind of, forget about that sometimes?
And that's exactly the kind of thinking Saadi is trying to spark in us. Think about it. We sleep, right? We sleep soundly. But God's presence doesn't just disappear when we do. So this isn't about, being strict or whatever. It's about an interchange that leads to a different way of being aware.
It's like having your spiritual wifey always on, even if you're not actively browsing.
I like that. And this leads us to something else interesting. Saadi, he doesn't actually tell us where this story comes from. Is it a hadith, like a saying of the prophet, or is it just, a story? And that ambiguity, it adds another layer to the whole thing.
Oh, okay. So he's kind of blurring the lines between religious teachings and personal experience. What's the point of that?
I think he wants us to engage with the story on different levels. Like if it's a hadith, then, it carries a certain authority. But if it's personal, it shows that anyone, you and me, we can reach this level of awareness. And the fact that he leaves it open, it makes us think critically. Think about the source. Think about how we're interpreting things.
It's like he's saying, don't just blindly accept. Think for yourself. This also makes me think about, storytelling in general. What's the difference between a story and a myth and a legend? Do those distinctions matter?
They absolutely do. A story can be, just a sequence of events, but a myth usually has a deeper meaning. It's symbolic. It's trying to connect us to some universal truth. And a legend that blends history and fiction. It's focused on heroes and amazing deeds. Saadi, he weaves all of these together. He creates a tapestry of wisdom.
So it's like he's using every storytelling tool he's got. He wants us to get it, to feel it on multiple levels.
That's it. And what makes humans different? It's our ability to tell stories, to look back, to analyze our past. And that ties into this idea of, being aware of ourselves. It makes me wonder, though, can we really say we own our past, our story, if we don't really understand it?
That's a great point. It's like if we just let the past happen to us, were we ever really there? And if not, maybe we miss that God presence too, right?
Yeah, you're connecting the dots, exactly. Remember, the holy man, he was fully present in his past, so God's presence was there too. It's subtle, but powerful.
So it's like saying, if you're not really present in your own life, how can you be aware of God being there with you?
Exactly. And that's why that line from the story hits so hard. Examine yourself, because God is aware of everything you do. Self-reflection isn't a punishment. It's a way to grow spiritually.
Okay, wow. We went from knee pain to the nature of storytelling to self-awareness. This is why I love Saadi. Before we go any further, is there anything you'd like to really highlight for our listeners so far?
I think what really strikes me is how Saadi takes something as ordinary as, as knee pain and reveals these huge truths about being aware, about our relationship with the divine. It's a reminder that, well, wisdom is everywhere if we just open our eyes to it.
It's like he's saying, look closer. There's more to this than you think. And speaking of looking closer, let's dive into the next part of this story. I'm curious to see what other gems we can find.
It's fascinating. The friend, he just assumed they were alone. It's like we forget so easily, that God's presence is there, even in the most ordinary moments.
Yeah, it's like our default setting, to see the world through this narrow lens, we miss the bigger picture.
Exactly. And the holy man, his response, it's like a wake-up call, a nudge to shift our perception, to remember both what we see and what we don't see.
Right. It's not about denying the physical world. It's more like expanding our awareness to include the spiritual dimension. Which makes me think, though, our modern world, it kind of reinforces that limited view, doesn't it? Everything's about material stuff, what you can touch and see.
Absolutely. We're bombarded with these messages, Achieve, acquire, indulge. It's easy to lose sight of what really matters.
And Saadi, he's calling us back, I think, back to that sense of wonder, to remember we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
And it's not some vague spirituality either. It's a real experience, a shift in consciousness. It changes how you see everything.
So it's about bringing that awareness of God, of that presence, into every part of our lives, the mundane, the amazing, everything. But then the question is, if God is always present, why don't we feel it all the time? What's the block?
That's where the Sufi idea of veils comes in. It's this idea that, well, our hearts are covered. There's something blocking us from fully experiencing God's presence.
Oh, so it's not that God is hidden. It's that we have these blinders on. We're creating our own obstacles.
Exactly. And these veils, they're often created by, our ego, our attachments, fears, negative thoughts, all that inner clutter. It blocks the signal.
It's like our own internal static messing with the divine frequency.
Love that. So spiritual growth, it becomes about removing those veils, purifying the heart, and cultivating the qualities that make us more receptive to the divine. It's not passive. It's something we have to work at.
Yeah, we have to put in the effort, clear the path. Which brings us back to that line. Examine yourself because God is aware of your actions. Self-reflection. It's the key to identifying and removing those veils.
That's it. It's about looking inward, being aware of our thoughts, our habits, our patterns, seeing where we're creating our own barriers.
That level of honesty, it takes courage,
Yeah.
to face those shadowy parts of ourselves.
It does. But the rewards are huge. As we clear away those veils, we become more open, more receptive to God's presence. And that changes everything.
It's like we start seeing with new eyes, experiencing beauty and connection in ways we never imagined.
And that brings us to another important theme in Saadi's work, beauty, as a way to connect with the divine. He uses a lot of imagery of gardens, flowers, nature to get this across.
Yeah, I can see that. In the Sufi tradition, beauty is seen as a reflection of God's qualities, right?
Yeah.
Like a manifestation of the divine in the physical world.
Exactly. So appreciating beauty, cultivating that appreciation, it becomes a way of deepening our connection with God. It's about letting that beauty touch us, awaken something deep inside.
Seeing the world with a sense of wonder, of appreciation. And that changes how we feel, too. When we're surrounded by beauty, we feel more peaceful, more joyful, more connected.
Like beauty nourishes the soul. It gives us a taste of that divine harmony that's behind all of creation.
Which ties into this idea of balance, which is so central to Saadi's teachings. He talks about finding that harmony between the material and the spiritual, the inner and the outer, the individual and the collective, finding our place in the bigger scheme of things.
And Saadi, he lived that balance. He was a scholar and a traveler, a mystic, and a man of the world.
He didn't choose one or the other. He embraced both. It's like he's saying, you don't have to choose between spirituality and engaging with the world. Find that sweet spot where your inner life and your outer life are in sync.
Yeah. And you see that harmony reflected in his poetry, too. It's profound, but it's also accessible. He blends spiritual insights with everyday wisdom, humor, observations about being human.
It speaks to the soul and the mind. He gauges us on so many levels. It's amazing.
It really is. Saadi was a master of language. He uses words to paint these vivid pictures, to evoke emotions, to share complex ideas in a way that's both beautiful and easy to remember. That's why his work has resonated with people for centuries.
Yeah, he's not just a poet, he's a teacher, a guide on this journey of life.
Studying Saadi, it's not just about gaining knowledge, it's about transformation, becoming more loving, more compassionate, more connected.
This has been such a rich exploration already. From presence and perception to beauty and balance, there's so much to unpack here.
And we've just scratched the surface. There's still so much to explore in Saadi's wisdom.
Well, let's keep diving in. Before we go to the next section, what really stands out to you so far? What are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
For me, it's this idea that, well, we have to be active in our spiritual growth. We can't just sit around and wait for enlightenment to hit us. We have to do the work, remove the veils, cultivate that awareness, and seek out beauty in the world around us.
I love that. It's so empowering. It means we have control, agency in our own spiritual journey.
Exactly. It reminds us that the journey itself is just as important as where we end up. Saadi's inviting us to appreciate every step along the way.
Beautifully said. And on that note, let's dive into the last part of our exploration. I'm excited to see what other treasures we uncover.
You know, there's something we haven't talked about yet, and it kind of brings everything together. This idea that, well, only humans can tell their own stories, right? Analyze their past. And that self-awareness, it seems really important to what Saadi is getting at.
Oh, that's interesting. So we've been talking about this shift in how we see things, this awareness of God's presence. How does knowing our own story, our past, how does that fit in?
Well, think about the holy man. He was fully present in his past, so God's presence was felt there too. It's like Saadi is saying, when we're really present in our lives, when we pay attention to our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, well, we become more tuned in to that divine presence that's always with us.
So it's not enough to just know, like, intellectually that God exists. It's about experiencing that presence in every single moment.
Exactly. And thinking about our past, understanding why we do the things we do, learning from our experiences, that's how we cultivate self-awareness. And that self-awareness makes that experience possible. It's like peeling back the layers of the ego and finding that spark of the divine within.
So instead of looking for God out there, we discover that divine presence inside ourselves.
Yes. And suddenly, that line from the story, examine yourself, for God is aware of your actions, it takes on a whole new meaning. Self-reflection, it's not about judging ourselves. It's about developing that inner awareness so we can see God more clearly.
So it's not a one-time thing. It's a practice, a way of living that helps us connect with that divine frequency.
And Saadi's writing, it reflects this. He's always encouraging us to look at our hearts, to question what we think we know, to search for deeper meaning in what we go through. He's like a mirror helping us see ourselves more clearly. And when we see ourselves more clearly, we can see God more clearly too.
I can see how that could be challenging, though, to really look at ourselves. It takes honesty and courage to face the parts of ourselves we might want to hide.
It definitely does. But it's often in those hidden corners, those parts of ourselves we haven't explored, that we find the most valuable treasures.
It's like we have to clear out the cobwebs and let the light shine in so we can see our true selves and God for who you really are.
And that's the goal, isn't it? To move beyond the illusions of the ego, to take off the masks we wear, and experience that real connection with the divine.
This has been an incredible deep dive. It's not just a story, it's like a whole different way of being, of seeing ourselves and where we fit in everything.
That's the beauty of Saadi. He doesn't just give us abstract ideas. He gives us, like, practical tools, wisdom that never gets old, and a path we can follow.
A path that leads us both inward to discover who we really are, and outward to a deeper connection with the world around us.
It's a journey. And like any journey, it has its ups and downs. There will be times of doubt, of confusion, of feeling lost. But there will also be moments of clarity, of insight, of deep joy, of connection.
So as we wrap up this episode, let's leave our listeners with one final thought. What are those seemingly small moments in your life that might reveal something deeper? If you just look a little closer, what's holding you back from fully experiencing God's presence?
And how can you cultivate that self-awareness, that presence, that openness to beauty that lets you see the divine in every moment?
This has been an amazing exploration of Saadi's wisdom. Thanks for joining us.
Sama.
Until next time, may your journey be filled with light, love, and the constant presence of the divine.